Welcome, everyone. This is our second session on marriage, family, and marketplace series. I hope you had a good week and you're eager to hear. How many of you are eager to hear? Can I hear you say amen? A little bit with more eagerness. How many of you are eager to hear the word of God? Would you say amen? Okay, great. I want to talk about essence of marriage. What does that word mean? Essence means the very basic nature, or invariable nature. Now, if you are to ask essence of something, you have to think about where is it coming from? What is the origin? Right? And we talked about the origin of marriage. It's not the caveman sitting around the fire and think about, oh, let's figure this out and we will call this marriage many, many years ago. If that's what the origin of marriage is, I don't know whether we could ever find what nature or essence of marriage is. But if it is from God, perhaps we can, right? So that's why it is so good to know the origin of marriage, and we want to talk about essence of marriage, okay? The very nature of marriage and very basic nature of marriage. So what is the essence of marriage? Simply put, love. I know a lot of things may be going through your mind, because that's what the world is saying. But it is not any kind of love, but it is covenant love. Covenant love. Okay? What does that mean? Okay, I'm going to explain that pretty carefully later on, but I want to say it's true and loyal love. Can you imagine you're married to someone and he or she's not true to you? And always cut corners, always doing things behind the scene. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a spouse you marry and he or she is not loyal to you, which means faithful to you, truthful to you? That's no good, right? So covenant love is true and loyal love to the end. To the end. I mean, at the moment of the day of wedding is not what you are committing to. You are committing to the lifetime long love. That's what marriage is. And so the essence of marriage is covenant love, loyal love, true love to the end. So we're talking about commitment. We're talking about faithfulness to your spouse, right? And to the end. Now, as we're talking about this essence of love, that sounds awfully like God Himself. And you may be thinking, why is that? Well, hello, it came from God. I hope you're getting this message that, origin of marriage stems from the very nature of God Himself, right? So marriage, essence of marriage, is really the essence of who God is. So last week we have seen and established that marriage is really a God's institution. It's God's idea. It's not the cavemen. It's not the some unknown tribe in Polynesia came up with the idea. It's not Koreans. It's not Chinese dynasty. It's God. Okay, that's the origin. That's the beginning, and that's the genesis. So basic implication is that when you get married, you're walking into God's house. Okay, and when you go someone's house, you intuitively know you kind of need to follow the rules, the way they operate in that household, don't you? For example, you come into my house, okay, and you walk into my, balcony, and then you don't take your shoes off, and you go up the stairs, and you go to the living room, and sit on my couch, and you put your feet on my tea table. How's that going to work? I would probably say, excuse me, probably kind, okay, at first. Would you mind take your shoes off and then come back up here? And then for some odd reason, you said, no, that's not the way I operate at my home. So you refuse. So I would probably a little bit firmer tone, Polly, please take your shoes off. Or else I will ask you to leave or call the police. But the point I'm trying to make is when you get married, you need to follow the house rule of God. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Does that make any sense? Right? You know, marriage is God's house, God's institution. He came up with the idea. It flows from His nature. It flows from His essence. Okay, so that's what we talked about last week, and I would like to talk about this topic, the essence of marriage, from what Jesus taught. Did you know that Jesus taught as well about marriage and divorce? Okay, Jesus really made us know who the Father is, the way He is, His character, His will, His plan, and His love. Everything about God, you learn through Him, and you find out He revealed through His Son Jesus Christ. In fact, Jesus said, Father and I are one. In other words, what Jesus said about marriage and divorce, Jesus talked about divorce, okay, is what God thinks about marriage and divorce, the essence of marriage. In Matthew chapter 19, once Pharisees tested and challenged Jesus by asking this question. Would you listen to this question? The tone of it, they're trying to test Jesus. Yahweh, right? They always do that. Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any reason? Okay. Now, they are testing Jesus because law of Moses said you can. Okay, but he's asking Jesus, challenging Jesus, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? It's an interesting question. I think it's a very pertinent question to every culture, but to our culture as well. And this is the way Jesus answered. Listen carefully. And this is Matthew chapter 19. Have you not read that God who created them from the beginning made them male and female? What is He doing? Instead of answering this question, whether it is lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause, He goes right back to the origin and the beginning, which is quoted from Genesis 1, verse 27 and 28, right? So God created them from the beginning, made male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his mother and father and hold fast or cleave, and that's the word that we're going to talk about, with his wife, and two shall become one. Wait a minute, we talked about that verse last week. Remember, there are two creation accounts in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. And in this creation accounts, God created male and female according to our image, God's image, plural. And then He gives this institution of marriage to male and female. That's all they had. Okay, not much choice. Okay. And therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast, cleave to his wife, and two shall become one flesh. And then Jesus' word. Jesus' word. This is what Jesus' heart is about marriage and divorce. And then He said, so when they get married, they are no longer two, but one flesh. No longer two, but one flesh. That's word of Jesus. And then He goes to say, what therefore God has joined together. Did you hear that? God has joined together. Let not man separate. Wow, these are powerful words of Jesus about marriage and divorce. Okay? What Jesus is saying is this. Is it lawful to divorce your wife for any reason? And he's obviously saying, no, that's not God's intention. Then why did the law of Moses give permission to get divorced? And he's going to explain this. So instead of answering the question of the Pharisees that comes from evil intention of testing Jesus, Jesus in fact go back to the very beginning and origin and Genesis by quoting Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And Jesus affirms that's the origin of marriage. I think that's good to know, right? It's not Polynesians, it's not the cavemen. It's not Koreans, it's not Chinese dynasty, but it is God. It's the Creator. From the beginning, made them male and female according to our image. And I want to explain that. God is not male or female. Okay, God is spirit. But from his spirit, male and female are created equally, but functionally different, which we will talk about when we talk about the roles of husband and wife. Okay? But that's where it stems. But we talked about men, only men are created in our image. And we talked about how God is always us, plural. 3 persons and one God. And husband and wife, 2 persons, you become one flesh. There is that correlation, right? Therefore, a man shall leave and hold fast. And that's the key word that we're going to be talking about today when we talk about God's covenant love. Cleave. Leave, cleave, and weave. That's the basic principle of marriage of the original inventor and designer. Okay? However, Jesus did not stop there, and then he said more. Okay? Much more, in fact, about the essence of marriage. So when husband and wife marry together, you're not 2 flesh, but one. That's the goal of marriage. That's the goal of marriage we will talk about in a couple of weeks. What therefore, listen to this, God has joined together. There is something divine happening when you make a vow, when you get married before the Lord and make a vow. There's that divine joining happening according to the scripture. God has joined together. So basically, Jesus is saying, let no man separate. And I hope you're getting this, okay? Like, can we think about what Jesus is saying? And may I suggest here Jesus is saying, right, the marriage between husband and wife, they're no longer 2 flesh, but one. No longer, but one. So marriage is a permanent relationship. Okay? And because it's one man and one wife, it's an exclusive relationship. Permanent and exclusive. And I know you get scared already. How many of you are scared? Honestly, if you ask most people in this society, in this culture, they hate those terms. Permanent? Do you want me to commit to someone permanently? We always want to leave room out, right? Prenuptial agreement. What is that? That's not permanent, right? I know someone going through a divorce with a prenuptial agreement. Someone visited their apartment, and every item in the house, there is that name of husband and wife and percentage of ownership upon that item. TV belongs to, I don't want to say June, but husband 70% and wife 30%. I don't know, kitchen table, husband 20% and wife 80%. I don't know. That's very, very different than what we are hearing here, isn't it? Marriage is a permanent and exclusive relationship from God's heart. Why? Because Jesus saying, because God has joined together. Okay? So don't get into marriage without knowing these people, right? Because this is his house. You got to follow his rules. Jesus stating something we, people of this culture, are so afraid, so reluctant to hear, perhaps hate to hear. One of the questions that I ask marrying the couples that I officiate when I go through premarital counseling is, what's your view of marriage? Okay, I mean, like, what kind of question is that? Do you feel nervous about marriage that you're going into? And do you feel very positive, or do you feel very skeptical? Are you anxious? Are you doubtful? Years ago, when I was in dental school, a friend of mine was getting married, okay, and is not an Asian person. He's whatever the ethnicity. And he's supposed to get married next day, and I am not making this up. He came to me a night before the wedding. And then he said to me, Paul, I'm not sure whether I'll be able to love Donna for the rest of my life. It was the night before the wedding. Night before the wedding. Right? I'm like, I mean, this is a smart guy. Really, he's the top of the class, and he's a really, really smart guy. And he's always out in the bar drinking when I'm studying for the, exam next day. Always calls me, Paul, what are you doing? I have an exam tomorrow. What do you think I'm doing? Right? And he always drink, like he's a smart guy, and he met this really beautiful woman and ready to get married. And can you imagine? He came over to my house, my apartment, a day before his wedding, and asking, I'm not sure whether I will love her for the rest of my life. I said, you shouldn't get married. You should not get married. Guess what happened to him? He didn't get married. He just blew the wedding off. And I think he did the right thing, because I know him, right? Jesus is stating marriage is a permanent and exclusive relationship flowing from his nature, flowing from his own nature. Because it is God's institution and God himself is involved. He is the one who joins the husband and wife together, okay, as an inseparable unit of God's house. Let me move on and explain what covenant is, okay? I know that word sounds so like old and ancient, but you need to understand this word to understand Christianity, okay? What is the essence of marriage as God's institution? It's the covenant love. What's a covenant? Covenant is this. It's an agreement or contract. So there is a legal, binding, public agreement you're making to promise to keep certain things. And we call that stipulations or agreements. When you buy a house between two parties, buyer and seller, you agree on something, the price, condition, and by what date. You all make this agreement, stipulations, and you sign the contract, you make the vow. It's a legal contract. Okay, so covenant is exactly that. But, what I'm trying to explain is that God's nature is covenantal, and his love is covenant love. He makes a promise, and he keeps it. Okay, so what is the essence of marriage? It's the covenant, and it's the covenant love. Where do we get that? Okay, and there are places we could go, but Genesis 2:20-24, when God says, therefore, a man shall leave his mother and father and hold fast. The word hold fast in the Hebrew word is dabak, or cleave to his wife and become one flesh. The key word is that word cleave, hold fast, dabak. Okay? The word means cling together, like a clothing is hanging on to this belt is hanging on to my clothing. Cling together and stick together, or cleave, which means bonding together covenantally. It's a covenant word, and it denotes cleaving means gluing together. Now listen, who's doing the gluing? God is. That's what dabak is. Okay, I know. Well, the atmosphere is getting very rigid. Okay, that's what marriage is, people. Right? It denotes clinging together, gluing together, cementing together. Now, here's the beautiful thing about Christian covenant. You know who made a covenant with his people? God did. God did. Listen to this verse. This is amazing. As I was studying, this is amazing. From Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 11, he used the word dabak and explained what marriage looked like. Here's the verse, 3:11. For as the loincloth clings, dabak, to the waist of a man. Can you picture that? As my clothing is hanging on, dabak, to my waist of a man, so I made whole house of Israel, whole house of Judah, cling to me, dabak to me. Wow, that's an amazing statement, isn't it? God allowed people to dabak, covenant, cleave to him. And God made a covenant with his people so that they might be for me a people, a name, and praise and glory. And then the verse ends by saying, but they do not listen. But skip that part for time being. But do you see what's going on here? God is making dabak, cleaving with his people, making relationship and gluing, cementing, cling onto, let people cling onto him. Covenant is grace, people. Do you see it? Covenant is grace. And you're going to see what kind of promise-keeping God he is. He's true and loyal to the end with his love. What do we call that? Hesed. Remember that? When we were studying the attributes of God. God's amazing character is steadfast love or loving kindness. He is faithful to the end, right? He is covenant, dabak, making, cutting covenant kind of God. So we see God made a covenant, which is grace, amazing. So can I just tell you, marriage breathe in the air of grace. Marriage thrives in the air of grace. If you're judgmental to one another, if you're not true to one another, if you're not loyal to one another, how do you think marriage will survive? It's not going to survive. It's going to be disastrous. You walk into my house, not with any clean shoes. You walk in with this muddy, like filthy shoes and try to build a relationship with me. It's not going to work. Okay, so we see God made a covenant, which is grace, with Israel and Judah, dabak to me. Okay, and I will cleave and dabak to you. Okay, that's why it's an amazing, amazing word. And in the Old Testament, I want to just explain a little bit more about covenant so that you could understand what marriage entails. When covenant is made between two parties, it's usually between king and vassals. Okay? So king pours grace, and I'm going to protect you, and you be obedient to me and love me. Do you see the agreement? Between two parties, it involves two or more parties, and there are agreements. I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to bless you, right? And you be true and loyal and obedient to me. If you don't, this is what's going to happen. So there is a blessing of covenant, and then there is a curse of covenant. And the agreement between the two parties, between the king and the vassal, is called stipulations, or what they're actually agreeing to keep. So that means if the agreement is kept, right, by the vassals or the people, following the stipulations, these are the blessings that'll happen to you. But if you break the covenant, if you violate the stipulations, obviously there's going to be curse. There's going to be a punishment. That's Old Testament, ancient, Near Eastern way of making a covenant or contract. If you think about it, in our culture, we have the same thing. When we are buying or selling a house, and you agree to deposit this money by this time, and if you don't, the contract is over, right? We do have stipulations. We do have agreements. And if it's not followed through and obeyed, there's going to be consequences. And if you try to cheat, you will be penalized and you'll be arrested. So that's what covenant is. Okay? So vow was done in public with witnesses, in front of witnesses. Who are the witnesses of your wedding? God is. And the assembly is. It's not just, we try. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll try it again. It's not like that. Marriage is not like that, people. That's not what God planned and intended. That's completely off. There's a great example of covenant that's happening in Genesis 15. We talked about this in Attribute of God too. This story is so great. God makes a covenant with Abraham, which is grace. What is so great about Abraham? For time's sake, nothing. Nothing. He wasn't even a Hebrew. He's from Mesopotamia. He's probably like Iraq region somewhere, right? And his father was an idol maker. So there's nothing good about Abraham, but God has chosen him, and God make a covenant with him. Do you hear the grace? You know what? I'm going to give you children, so many descendants, and it'll become a nation. That's a blessing in ancient time. You're going to become a nation. Not only that, through your seed, singular seed, all nations will be blessed. And we know that's the promise of Jesus and the Messiah, right? And then years went by and Abraham has no children. So Abraham began to make some complaints. God, you made a promise. I don't even have, don't worry about nation, but let me have one son, right? Maybe I'll just use Eliezer, my manager, as my, heir. And then God shows up and God cuts a covenant, okay? And making an agreement which is a legally binding publicly. And this is the way ancient people signed a contract. You know what they did? They get a whole bunch of animals, cow and goats and whatever, animals, and you cut in half. Can you picture that? Okay. You cut animal in half. I don't know which cut, sagittal, coronal, I'm not sure, right? Can you imagine? And then you split the half. You split the half, like half. And then let's say Paul and I are making covenants, right? And we walk between these carcasses. Bloody, gory, death. You know what I'm doing? You know what we're doing? We are signing the contract. Making a vow. Should we do that in our weddings? Kill some animal and then you walk between the two. Some people, jump over the husband. Sometimes you crack on the light bulb or something. I don't know. But we do animal split, right? God made a covenant with Abraham, right? And basically, God is promising to Abraham, I'm going to give you children. I'm going to make you into a nation. And through your son, your seed, one seed, all nations will be blessed. And if I do not keep my promise, my stipulation is if I do not keep the promise, see what happened to the animals? That's going to happen to me. That's what contract is. You do the same. You love and obey me. And if you break that stipulation, See these animals? And that's going to happen to you. So God made a covenant with Abraham, right? Meaning, it's an amazing grace if you think about it. I'm going to keep it. If I don't, the curse is the death like these animals. So God cuts the covenant in Genesis 15. Let's review, okay? Essence of marriage is covenant. Okay? It's not, let's try. If it works, great. If not, we just try with someone else. That's not God's, right? So marriage is a covenant, and covenantal relationship that pictures God and his people, between man and his bride or his wife, to be true and loyal to each other. Okay? June, is this still clear to you? Only 1 week? Oh, okay. It felt like a couple months. Right? I want to be true and loyal to you. Loyal. It's a loyal love. Right? So, in front of witnesses, who are the witnesses? God is. God is the one who's joining it together. And then the assembly, parents, families and friends and church in front of the witnesses. And it is highlighted with what? The vows. The vow. That's what the vow is. You are promising in front of God, to God and to one another, that I'm going to be true and loyal to her and to him. That's what vow is. Can I just read the vow from last week? And will you answer, Jim? Where's your bride? Is she here? Oh, okay, maybe I should ask you to come to the front. Okay, it's okay. I even have a ring. Okay, June, listen to this vow with this covenant message. Listen to this. June, will you take Christina to be your wife? Will you commit yourself to her happiness, her self-fulfillment as a person, to her usefulness in God's kingdom? And will you promise to love, honor, and trust and serve her in sickness, in health, in adversity, and in prosperity, and be true and loyal to her as long as you both shall live? More convincingly, will you? No, it's not I do, I will. No, it's very important. You know what covenant is? It's not about present love, present feeling. It's my future promise. Will you say I will? Did you hear it? Vow is not about your present feeling. People sometimes ask me, can we write our own vows? I'm like, oh no. Because I already know what's coming. Only place they learn the vow is from sitcoms and movies. And they write this beautiful, beautiful vows, But it's mainly about my present feeling towards you. Oh, you are my rock, my salvation. I don't know. You express that kind of stuff. But that's not a vow. A vow is about future love, committed love. Didn't you hear that? I promise to love her and honor her and trust and serve her in sickness, in health, and in adversity and in prosperity, in rich or poor, okay? And be true and loyal to her as long as we both shall live. Do you hear that commitment nature? Covenant nature? It's a solemn thing, people. It's a solemn thing. Only by grace we could live through together for the rest of our lives. Most marriages end up in divorce in 2 years, within 10 years. Right? These are the blessings and what are the blessings and curses? If kept by grace and be true and loyal to each other, you live a Christ-centered life, and there's going to be a blessing. What kind of blessings will you see? Well, you're going to have happiness, true companionship, unity, friendship, joy of being a witness to this broken world. Do you see the broken world around you? Perhaps you grew up in one, right? And even display this kingdom relationship of Christ and the church. That's the blessing of marriage. What about the curse? I thought about this. If the covenant is broken, if your vow is broken, there's going to be a curse, which is death. Okay? Curse of broken relationship, broken hearts, broken children's hearts, broken parents' heart. When couple gets divorced, imagine mother and father's heart. You know, I recently talked to someone who went through divorce, and I married them about 20 years ago. And the mother still calls me, talks to me. I encouraged them to get married 20 years ago. And they went through divorce about, 5 years ago. And the mother of the bride still calls me. And I have to listen. And I have to listen with humility. You know why? Because she's brokenhearted. Right? If the covenant is broken, there's going to be a curse and death. Curse of a broken relationship, broken hearts, broken hope, broken deep joy, broken family, broken lives, death. That's what's going to happen. Do you understand that? Marriage is a serious thing. So many marriages are under the curse right now. Don't you see it? Right? There is no conversation. There is no companionship. There is no unity. There is no true transparency. There is no true and loyalty to one another. It's under the curse. Right? In need of salvation and redemption. And that's what the gospel is. Okay? And the marriage is to display the gospel. And I hope you are seeing this. We already talked about this. Marriage is a covenantal love. Therefore, it is not about present love, it's about future love. Right? It's not about you are my rock and my salvation right now. It's about I'm going to be committed to you and true and loyal to you for the rest of my life. In sickness, in health, in adversity, and in prosperity. No matter what the circumstances, I want to be true and loyal to her. Okay? So it is commitment love. Are you a committed person? I'm seriously asking you. Are you a committed person? Will people see you as a committed person? Man, you need to prepare your heart before you get married. It's not going to suddenly happen. Right? Are you a covenant-keeping kind of person? I'm not talking about your nature, though. Because human beings by nature are not covenant-keeping people. You know why? Because by nature we are sinful and selfish. Very selfish. In fact, someone says, sin nature is shockingly selfish. Did you know that? You're shockingly selfish people. Without the grace and redemption of God, you're shockingly self-absorbed people. Me too. Only when triune God takes my life over, my heart changes. Only then I'll be able to love my wife for the rest of my life. Right? I'm going to be sharing this some other time too. You know what makes your children happiest? I know it is true, and I've seen it. It's when their mother is loved by her husband. children are happy. When husband and wife treat each other so with dignity and honor and love and respect, children feel safe. Otherwise, the children feel very, very unstable. It alters your personality, right? It makes you. So this thing about true and loyal love, and I want to explain that is the love of God, isn't it? Love of God is true and loyal love, which endures forever, and we call that Hesed love. And you need to know that love if you're going to be married. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. It can't. It can't, right? Hesed. And in our attribute of God class, God's Hesed love, steadfast love, is true and loyal. Only God is true, you know that, right? Only God is true. He is infinitely truthful. He's so real and truthful. Do you want to be truthful to your spouse? Or do you want to just always cut corners and keep some money in the pocket and never tell your wife? We need transparencies, right? Transparency. True and loyal. God is true and He's loyal. He's faithful to His promises. I'm going to keep this promise, and He does. Now, here is one more thing I want to tell you. God's Hesed, loyal love, is staggering love. What do you mean? Staggering to the fact that His Hesed is even when His bride is unfaithful, He's faithful. That's Christianity. That's the gospel. That's the Hesed. We're not like that. But God is, right? He remains true and loyal even to the unfaithful spouse, and that is the gospel story, and that is the story of the new covenant of the cross, isn't it? Isn't it, right? Jesus, God, who is Yahweh, took the curse, blessing and curse. If you break the covenant, right? The bride broke the covenant, but He took the curse upon Himself on the cross, and He redeemed His bride, His church. That's the gospel story. If you are transformed and regenerated by that grace and love, then we could do covenantal love and covenantal marriage. Not because you are so great, I'm great, but because of His great love and grace upon your life. That's the message of the new covenant. And that's God's true loyal love. And that's the grand picture of essence of marriage, people. Okay? We pick up all these, garbage from the world. Garbage from the world. Literally garbage. It's like worse than garbage from the world. And you try to apply that to your marriage. I want to just close the essence of marriage by going back to the original question the Pharisees asked Jesus. So, under what condition is it lawful to divorce your wife? If you ask God, never. Never. Right? Why? Because Jesus said, because of the hardness of your heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. That's what Jesus said. Do you hear it? That's God's heart. That's the story of faithful Hesed love of the groom who is coming back. And we are His people. And we have received His Hesed. Right? Marriage is a covenantal relationship, people. And it is what God has joined together, and let no man separate. We are in this, I don't know whether you sense it, you need Jesus desperately. You need Jesus. If you want to have a marriage, you need Jesus desperately. Otherwise, I suggest not to get into it. I really do, actually. Otherwise, it's going to break your heart, break other people's heart, break your parents' heart, break your children's heart. Like that's what's happening in this world, right? Getting into marriage irresponsibly, right? We need Jesus in our heart. We need His loyal love, Hesed love, which is available to you, right? So, what is the essence of marriage? The essence of marriage really is the essence of who God is. Do you want great marriage? Come to Christ. Okay, let's pray.